Hi, I'm Ethan Wong, and today I'm here speaking with Marlin Barton as part of the Writing Our Stories program. Writing Our Stories is a program designed to help juvenile teens in the teens in the juvenile prison system as part of the Alabama Writers Forum. Thank you for joining me today. And the first question I wanted to get into is tell us a little more about the program, kind of its origins and maybe a little bit of how it operates today. How did the idea first come to mind to use writing in the juvenile justice system in the first place?
Okay, I'll be glad to talk about that a little bit. The Writing Our Stories program has been in existence now for 25 years, and it is a partnership program between the Alabama Writers Forum and the Alabama Department of Youth Services. And the way it got started was Jeannie Thompson, who's the executive director of the Writers Forum, went out to Mount Meigs juvenile facility with a friend of hers who was in the Alabama state legislature. And they went Christmas Eve and they went from dorm to dorm to, I think they took pizza and drinks to just, create a little cheer for the boys out at Mount Meigs. And while they were there, Jeannie, who's a poet, got to talking to some of the boys about writing, and she sensed some enthusiasm, and she said, would you guys be interested in a creative writing program out here? And they all got real excited and they were really interested. So Jeannie Thompson went to the executive director of the Department of Youth Services, whose name was James Dupree. And she pitched the idea of bringing creative writing to these students, and he was all for it. In fact, the Department of Youth Services has completely funded this program since the beginning, and it's been great because we haven't had to apply for grants. We haven't had to generate, the money to keep the program going. The Department of Youth Services has really believed in this. We have basically three goals, I suppose, with this program. And the first is to, of course, help these students become better writers and readers. A second goal is to give them something to feel good about. When I sit with a student and work with him one-on-one, and I can praise a line in a poem, and then I can see the pride that the student takes. So many of these boys have been told they're no good, that they're just that they're not worth anybody's time. So when I'm out there and I'm working with them and I can praise what they do, it makes them feel good about themselves. And then at the end of each year, we publish an anthology of their work so that they get to see their work in print, and they get to, before COVID, they get to read to an audience and they get to hear applause for their work. And it's a great day when we're able to do that. So it gives the boys something to feel good about and take pride in. And the final goal really is to offer writing to them as a kind of therapy. We feel like there's therapeutic value in what they do. Without my ever telling the boys or trying to push them to do it, they tend to write about the things that they've been through. And I see it in their poems and their stories. And sometimes I'll work with a student on a poem and he'll say, well, this really happened. And I learned early on to just to respond and to say, I'm sorry that you've been through, something so difficult or so terrible or so tragic, but you're writing about it really well. And I'm glad that you decided to take on what's happened in your life in writing. This is a good thing that you're doing here. It's going to move people who read this poem you're working on. And ultimately it gives these students a voice. So that's kind of what we try to do in the program. And to just tell you a little bit more about the program overall, we started at Mount Meigs Juvenile Facility in the fall of 1997. And the next year, we went into a girls' facility in Birmingham called Chalkville. And we were there for, I think, about 12 years or so. And unfortunately, a tornado really pretty much destroyed the facility. So we haven't been in a girls facility for some time now, but we're also in another boys facility in Birmingham called VACA, and there's a poet there named Daniel Devon who teaches there, and he teaches much like I do. So that's a little bit of a picture of how the program got started and where we are. And I'll add here, we also are now in 2 middle schools in Shelby County, Alabama. These schools they're not at-risk schools. They're just they're just regular middle schools. And we are with, I think, a 6th and a 7th grade class, or the 6th and 7th grade classes, because we're in multiple classes at both of these schools. So the program that we have, it doesn't just work with at-risk youth or incarcerated youth. The kind of lessons we work from are really for any kid, and we feel like there's the same kind of benefits for any child who takes creative writing.
Yeah. And that's so interesting to me because that's like, it kind of played into a question I asked like poets or individuals about their work, which is why poetry, kind of like, what was the decision kind of making it to, you said you choose poetry as a medium for doing this program?
I suppose because Jeannie Thompson's idea, when she, first spoke with those boys out there, that so the idea was to use poetry, but we also do fiction and nonfiction. But what I have found and what I discovered early on is that for whatever reason, the boys, I think, do better with poetry than a longer form. I think writing a short story or writing a memoir, a short memoir essay, or is it, it it's a little scarier, I think, a longer work. So even a 3 to 4 page double spaced short story, that's a good bit for them. And I tend to get better work in their poetry than I do their fiction. But I'm a fiction writer, so I still love teaching fiction, and I do get stories from my students. And I don't usually teach nonfiction. I think Daniel does a little bit of that in VACA.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think part of it is the accessibility of poetry, perhaps.
I
Kind
think
of, it's
so.
easy to get
That's a
into.
good way to say it. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask about that because something that I've kind of had trouble recently with is getting people who don't really identify themselves as poets into actually writing poetry. It kind of feels like when they see poetry, they might think, oh, well, because I'm not a poet, I can't write poetry. And they just kind of automatically give it up right there. And so I wanted to ask, what have you ever found that in your program, especially with like younger kids? And what methods have you employed to kind of get them out of that mindset?
The good thing about this program is the students that I teach all take my classes voluntarily, and it's the same at the VACA facility. If we tried to force all the students at the facilities to take creative writing, it would never work. So the kids who come into our classes, they want to be there. They have an interest already. Some of them have already been writing poems on their own after a fashion. But I do think in the beginning, when they first come into the class, they can find it a little intimidating. But I make clear to them that I'm going to walk them through things. I'm going to teach them how to do this. And in fact, usually I'll say on the first day, look, you don't have to worry. I'm not going to have you come in here and just tell you, okay, everybody write a poem. We're going to work through this kind of step by step. So the way our lessons are developed, so we start with simple things like an exercise that focuses on using the five senses and using simile. And then we move on from there to focusing on using imagery. And then we have another lesson where we focus on personification. And we have a couple of lessons where we focus on the use of metaphor. And so we build from some of these early lessons. And we also work from models. Usually the way a normal class kind of works like this. The students will come in, let's say we're going to do an exercise or an early lesson. Let's say we're going to focus on using similes. I'll show the students a poem that uses a number of similes, a published poem by, a well-known poet, and I'll give them copies of the work. We'll read it out loud. We'll talk about what the poem seems to be saying to us, what it means. We'll talk about how it uses language. We'll talk about the imagery. We'll talk about the appeals to the five senses. We'll talk about how the similes work. And so we go through the poem really slowly and carefully, and we take a look at how it's put together. And then what we'll do is we'll do a group poem on the whiteboard where we might, a lesson that I often use is where the students have to describe parts of the body. Like as our group poem, I'll say, okay, let's describe parts of a hand, and we'll list fingers, thumb, fingernails, palm. So we'll list parts of a hand, and then we will write a simile on the board for each part of the hand. And so as the students call out lines and ideas, I'll write them down, and I'll prompt them a little bit, and I might change a line a little bit, but they get to see how a poem is put together, one phrase at a time, one word at a time, even one line at a time. And I remember I've often quoted this. I think it was in my very first year, and this would have been one of the first exercises we did. We were describing parts of a head, someone's head, and we were trying to come up with a description for hair. And one of my students said, "My hair is like ebony cloth spun from a midnight sky." And my mouth just kind of fell open. I thought, where did that come from? And so I wrote that down. So you never know what kind of, original lines you're going to hear. Every year I have writers who are much better writers at their age than I was. I have students who have just kind of a natural innate gift for language and for metaphor. And so it's a lot of fun to write those group poems because I never know what great lines I'm going to hear. So then after we do a group poem and the students have some sense of how to go about this, then the students will work at their desk on their own poem. And sometimes I'll also show them student examples from earlier classes, from some of the anthologies that we publish each year. Some of the, at Mount Meigs, we publish the Open the Door anthologies. And I think it helps them sometimes to see what, students from, earlier generations, you might say, did with the same exercise. And so after they write their own poems, I have them read them out loud, and the students really do listen to each other and they're supportive of each other. And then they'll get on the computers and type their drafts, and then I'll sit down with each student, and I think it's what I enjoy doing most, and that is working with them through their poem, line by line, making corrections, suggesting changes, and we work on that poem until it's the best version of it than it can be. And I really love working with students like that, that when I'm sitting there beside them, they have my full attention. And they need that. They need to know that someone is completely focused on them.
Yeah, that's just so amazing to me that you can kind of reach out, like regardless of the audience, reach out in that way to a group of kids and kind of just make those kinds of connections and really get them into something that they're already excited about, like creative writing. And I think you're so right about like just the way that they can amaze you sometimes with what they come up with, or the way that a lot of them don't even realize just how talented they are already. And it kind of takes them expressing it and gaining that confidence in themselves to really break out of their shells in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask also, when you're kind of doing the, because I saw like in the mission statement for the program, there's something about like nonviolence and everything, but when you're actually doing the program, does that ever creep into your mind, or are you like focused on just the writing and then that comes later?
I just focused on the writing. In fact, most of the time when I'm in the middle of, teaching a lesson, working with a student, I kind of forget that I'm in a juvenile facility, and they're just students that, I might be teaching anywhere. In fact, sometimes I do teacher workshops, for high school teachers or even junior high teachers. And I'll say, the students that I teach, they all come from your classrooms. But I forget that I'm in a juvenile facility. All I'm worried about, all I'm focused on is that kid that I'm sitting next to. And it's a great job.
It does sound amazing. And that part about just getting that kind of attention, just one-on-one, that appreciation, everything, just that dedication is really, really important when it comes to something like writing. Because I think when it comes to writing, and for me personally, like writing poetry especially, it's just such a personal thing that when you're writing it, it feels like you're pouring your heart out. And so you are naturally kind of defensive about it. And you need that kind of attention to it. You can't just have very callous remarks kind of thrown out about it. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't really do the job, if that makes any sense.
It is. And in all the years that I've been teaching at Mount Meigs, I've noticed that the boys are really supportive of each other. When they read their rough drafts aloud, the other students are listening, and they'll comment and compliment the students' poems. Sometimes when I critique their poems and I hand them back out, because we print out their poems once we're done with them, and I'll, even though I've been through the poem line by line with the student already, I've always felt like it's important for me to take a printed copy and to critique it and mark things on the page that are, when I can write good in the margin, and nice simile and nice use of personification. I think it helps them to see that written down, to see that kind of praise, not just hear it, but to see it. And so a lot of times when I hand back their hard copies of the poems, I see them sharing them with each other. They'll say, hey, look at this, and so they like to look at each other's work, and they like to share the work.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask kind of, has your perspective on writing changed after being through this kind of program, or after working for this program, or just working with students in general? How has that changed your perspective on writing, and maybe even your writing itself?
I don't think it's changed my perspective, but it is a constant reminder. The work that I do is a constant reminder that writing really is and can be something vital, particularly for these students. I've had students tell me that when they're taking my writing classes, that they get into less trouble out at Mount Meigs, that they feel more calm. You know, they make clear to me that the work we do and the work they're doing, it means something to them. It has an effect upon them. And so it's a nice reminder to me that writing really does matter. Fiction, poetry, nonfiction, all of it matters. All of it speaks to us in a way that we need, that reminds us of our humanity, that connects us. So it's just a great reminder of that. As far as my own writing, I suppose the teaching, the way that the teaching I've done has affected me was a number of years ago now, maybe after I'd been teaching in the program 3 or 4 years, I ended up writing a novel called The Cross Garden, where one of the two main characters is a 16-year-old kid who's been released from a place like Mount Meigs. And I know I would never have written this novel if I had not worked with these boys. And I have to add here, we have copies of my books in the library, and sometimes my students will read something I've written. And so years ago, this kid came up to me. He said, "Mr. Barton, I read your book," meaning The Cross Garden. And I said, "Oh," he says, "that's the best book I ever read." I said, "Really?" In the novel, the younger character, the 16-year-old, was incarcerated for breaking and entering. And so the kid looked at me and said, "You know, I'm in here for breaking and entering." And I said, "Really?" I said, "No, I didn't know that. I don't know why y'all are here. I just teach you." And he says, "Yeah, I'm in here for breaking and entering, just like the boy in the novel." I said, "Well, I always wondered if I got it right." And he looks at me, and it's the best review I'll ever get. He said, "Oh, you got it right."
That's incredible. I think, yeah, just everything that you just mentioned is just exactly the kind of thing we need in reaching out to people and understanding why it's necessary, understanding that it's necessary, and understanding the role that poetry can play. Because something I'll harp on is that creative writing is, in most places, a luxury. You have the classic educational pillars, you have math, science, you'll even have English and art, but it feels a lot of times like actually teaching writing, actually letting the students write as kind of like a part of their education is never really a priority. And I think it's a really a shame, because it is such a important method of self-expression. I know it lets me regulate my emotions and just kind of almost keep myself in check when I'm like, okay, this is how I'm feeling. And when you don't understand how you're feeling, you write it out, and then you kind of understand maybe a little more after that.
Right.
So I think, oh no, go ahead.
This one thing I always have the boys keep journals. So the first 15 minutes or so of each class, they write in their journals. They're free to write whatever they want. They know that no one else is going to read what they've written. And I tell the students, I said, you can just write about what's on your mind, what you've been having to deal with lately. I said, I think you're going to find that, writing in your journals, it's not going to make a problem go away, but it will help you deal with it. I remember I had a freshman English teacher when I started college who made us keep journals. And it's the first time that I discovered I liked writing. And I found that writing about things I was going through helped me deal with them. And I think the students see this pretty quickly. And in fact, a lot of them, I tell them to write at least half a page for each class when they come in. And a lot of them write much more than that. and I'll give them a little extra time, because I always hate to stop anybody from writing something. Uh, as we're talking here, one little story kind of popped into my mind years ago, right after we had the reading for the newest anthology. There were a number of parents there, and the mother of one of my students came up to me after the program, after she heard her son read, and she said, you know, I call here and talk to my son every week, and all he wants to talk about is the writing class. And she looked at me and she said, I feel like I almost have my son back. And that was an amazing thing to hear, to know that this program meant that much to him, that the writing he was doing was so important to him, and that it helped him kind of regain the person he was, and the person that his mother knew was still there. That was a really profound thing for me to hear.
Yeah, and all of that was incredible. And I kind of want to end this on a separate note, which is we've been talking a lot about the program side of things, running a program for students. Like, how do we help them get excited about writing? What is the kind of connection that we need? But I actually want to sort of flip it on its head and ask, what is your advice directly now to people who want to start writing? Maybe they're just learning about poetry and are kind of interested, and they don't really know where to start. What is your direct advice to those people? Maybe something similar to what you would tell your kids.
Couple of things. I would say maybe start keeping a journal. You know, if you really haven't done much writing in the past and you find yourself just beginning to be interested and wondering if you can do it, I would say keep a journal, put words on the page. I would say just begin writing. You know, if you're interested in writing poems, then you need to read good poets. You know, I always tell my students, if you want to be a good fiction writer or a good poet, you have to read good poetry and good fiction. So I would tell a beginning writer, you know, to go and read the kind of writing that you want to emulate. And you know, if you can take a creative writing class, that's a good thing. There are some good books on creative writing. There's some bad ones too, but there are good books on writing fiction and writing poetry, and you know, that's a place to go. There are conferences you can go to and meet with a writer who maybe, you know, who can critique a little bit of your work. So it's a matter of putting words on the page. It's a matter of reading, of finding out who you need to be reading, which you can learn from a teacher or maybe from someone at a conference. You know, those are the things that I did. I took a creative writing class when I was an undergraduate at Alabama, and the teacher encouraged me, suggested things to read, and that kind of sent me on my way.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all the service you do at your program. It truly sounds incredible.
Oh, well, I appreciate you wanting to talk with me, and appreciate you wanting to bring a little attention to our program. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you so much.